You've been chasing it. We all have. That feeling, just out of reach, always one step ahead of you, like a shadow you can't quite catch no matter how fast you run. Happiness, the real kind. Not the kind you get from a new phone or a pay raise that feels incredible for exactly 3 days before fading into background noise. The real kind. The kind that stays. Here's what no one tells you. Happiness isn't a destination. It's not waiting for you at the end of a promotion, a relationship, or a number on a scale. The Stoics knew this thousands of years ago, and it's more relevant now than it has ever been. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire and still wrestled with this question. Epictetus was born into slavery and still found a way to live with profound peace. They weren't lucky, they weren't special, they were intentional. That's the word, intentional. In this video, we're going to walk through 12 things, real, practical, grounded things, that you can start doing right now to build a life that actually feels good from the inside. Not performed happiness, not curated happiness. The quiet, steady, unshakable kind that doesn't depend on everything going your way. And if that's the kind of happiness you're here for, the real, lasting, inside-out kind, go ahead and drop "I choose happy" in the comments right now. It's a small act, but intention always starts somewhere. 13 lessons, one life. Let's get into it. Laugh like you mean it. Let's start somewhere unexpected. Let's start with laughter. Not the polite kind, not the performative chuckle you offer when your coworker tells a bad joke. Real laughter. The kind that catches you off guard, that makes your eyes water and your stomach hurt in the best way. The kind you almost apologize for because it feels too big for the room. Epictetus once said, "He who laughs at himself never runs out of things to laugh at." And there's more depth in that line than it first appears. Because laughter, genuine, unguarded laughter, is one of the most direct routes to perspective you'll ever find. When you can laugh at the chaos of your own life, you're telling the universe, "I see you, and I refuse to be crushed by you." The Stoics weren't the stern, joyless philosophers history sometimes makes them out to be. Marcus Aurelius, in his private journals, wrote with a dry wit that would surprise most people. He found comedy in the absurdity of human ambition, including his own. That self-awareness, that lightness, it was a feature, not a bug. It kept him grounded when the weight of an empire could have broken him entirely. Here's what science now confirms, what philosophy always suggested. Laughter lowers cortisol, the stress hormone. It releases endorphins. It physically changes your body's chemistry in the same way exercise does. You're not just feeling better when you laugh, you are biologically becoming better. So the practice here is simple, but it requires intention. Watch the comedy special you've been putting off. Call the friend who always makes you lose it. Learn to find the absurdity in your own mistakes rather than spiraling into shame. Stop taking every moment so seriously that you forget to enjoy it. Life is genuinely funny sometimes. The traffic, the miscommunications, the fact that you're a temporary arrangement of atoms trying to figure out your purpose. Laugh at it, not because it doesn't matter, but because laughing is how you stay sane while it does. Go outside. Change everything. There's a reason you feel something shift when you step outside. Something settles. The noise in your head gets quieter. It's not imagination. It's not sentimentality. It's biology meeting philosophy in one of the most elegant ways possible. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But he also spent enormous time in the field, outdoors, moving through the natural world. He understood something that modern life has almost entirely forgotten. The outer world and the inner world are not separate. One informs the other. When you spend time in nature, you're not escaping your life. You're returning to it. The Japanese have a practice called Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. It sounds almost too gentle to be significant, but the research behind it is striking. Time spent among trees lowers blood pressure, reduces anxiety, improves immune function, and elevates mood in ways that no screen can replicate. You don't have to hike a mountain, a park, a quiet street lined with trees. A few minutes sitting with your back against something old and rooted. That's enough to begin. The Stoics believed that nature was the greatest teacher of acceptance. Seasons change without resistance. Rivers carve their path without complaint. The oak tree doesn't argue with the wind. It bends, survives, and keeps growing. There's a lesson in that for every single person watching this video right now. So here's the invitation. Step outside today with no agenda, no podcast in your ears, no destination to rush toward. Just walk. Notice what's above you, around you, beneath your feet. Let the world remind you that it existed long before your problems did, and it will exist long after. That's not nihilism, that's relief. You are part of something vast, and the natural world is one of the only places left that will remind you of that without charging you anything for the privilege. Own your morning. Before you close the video, hear this out, because be a morning person is possibly the most groaned-at piece of advice in the entire self-improvement world. It sounds like something a productivity influencer says right before trying to sell you a planner. But strip away the aesthetic and the 5 a.m. club mythology, and what remains is something the Stoics practiced with deep sincerity. Marcus Aurelius began each morning with a ritual of reflection. Before he was an emperor, before he handled decisions that affected millions of lives, he sat with his thoughts. He wrote, he prepared. He asked himself what kind of man he intended to be that day, not what he needed to accomplish, who he needed to be. That distinction matters more than most people realize. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. That's not motivation poster language. That's a man who understood that mornings are the only moment of the day that genuinely belong to you before the world makes its demands. The science supports it too. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, self-control, and clarity, is freshest in the morning. The choices you make before the noise begins are cleaner, calmer, more aligned with who you actually want to be. When you sleep through that window, you hand the first chapter of your day to everyone else. You don't need to wake at 4 in the morning. You don't need a cold plunge and a green smoothie. What you need is 10 minutes that are yours. Sit quietly. Write one thought. Watch the light change. Set a single intention for the day ahead. Give yourself the gift of beginning on purpose rather than in reaction. The morning is not just the start of your day. In Stoic terms, it's the start of a life. Treat it accordingly. Plan it or lose it. Seneca said something that should probably be tattooed on the inside of every procrastinator's wrist. Begin at once to live, and count each separate day as a separate life. It's one of those lines that sounds beautiful until you sit with it long enough to feel the urgency underneath. Each day is a life. That means each morning you wake up, you have been handed a complete, finite story arc, a beginning, a middle, and an end. What you do with the middle is entirely up to you. Here's the thing about an unplanned day. It doesn't give you freedom, it gives you drift. You end up reactive, pulled from one distraction to the next. And by the time evening arrives, you have that hollow, unsettled feeling of someone who moved through hours without really living them. The Stoics called this kind of existence a form of unconscious life, and they considered it one of the great wastes. Planning your days isn't about squeezing every drop of productivity from your waking hours. It's about something more human than that. It's about deciding in advance what matters to you today. A conversation you want to have, a project you want to move forward, a walk you want to take, a book you want to open. When you plan with intention, you're telling yourself that your time has value, and that quiet self-respect accumulates in ways you'll start to feel within weeks. The Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering that you will die, wasn't meant to be morbid, it was meant to be clarifying. When you remember that the number of days you have is not infinite, suddenly each one feels worth designing. So tonight, before you sleep, take 5 minutes. Write down 3 things you intend to do tomorrow, not a crushing list, just 3 things that matter. Then wake up tomorrow and live like you meant it. Never stop loving this. At some point in your life, something lit you up. Maybe it was music, writing, running, painting, building things with your hands, cooking meals that took all afternoon, something that made time disappear and left you feeling more like yourself than almost anything else. And then, somewhere along the way, you stopped. Life got busier. It started to feel indulgent. Someone made an offhand comment, or you compared your work to someone else's and decided you weren't good enough to justify the hours. So you quietly set it down and kept walking. The Stoics would call this a small but serious betrayal, not of your talent, but of your character. Because the things we love doing are rarely accidental. They point towards something essential in us, something that wants expression regardless of whether it earns money or earns praise. Epictetus was clear on this. External opinions are not yours to control. What is yours, entirely, completely, irreversibly yours, is how you choose to spend the one life you've been given. Here's the modern trap. We've turned hobbies into side hustles and passion into productivity, and somewhere in that process, we forgot that not everything needs to be optimized. Some things are worth doing simply because they make you feel alive. A painting you'll never sell, a song you'll never perform, a garden no one else will ever see. Research in positive psychology consistently shows that people who maintain creative or physical pursuits outside of work report higher overall life satisfaction, better stress resilience, and stronger sense of identity. This isn't a luxury, it's architecture. It's how you build a self that can weather the hard seasons. So ask yourself honestly, what did you used to love that you've quietly abandoned? What lights something up in you when you even think about it? That's not nostalgia talking. That's something true trying to get your attention. You don't have to quit your job or reinvent your life. You just have to give that thing a Tuesday evening, a Sunday morning, 20 minutes before the rest of the world wakes up. Start there. The joy will remember where it left off, and so will you. Choose kindness. Always. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his private journal that he never intended anyone else to read. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. That line is startling in its simplicity. After pages of wrestling with philosophy and duty and the nature of the universe, it comes down to that. Stop theorizing. Start acting. Be kind. Kindness gets a strange reputation in the modern world. It gets mistaken for weakness, for naivety, for the behavior of someone who hasn't yet learned how harsh the world can be. But the Stoics understood kindness as one of the highest expressions of strength. It takes discipline to be kind when someone is difficult. It takes courage to be generous when you feel depleted. It takes real character to treat a stranger with warmth when nothing in you is required to. And here's the part that might surprise you. Kindness is profoundly selfish in the best possible sense. When you act with generosity toward another person, your brain releases oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, the same neurochemical cocktail associated with deep satisfaction and well-being. You are, quite literally, making yourself happier by making someone else's day a little better. But beyond chemistry, there's something Stoic philosophy points to that science is only beginning to articulate. We are social creatures woven into a fabric of mutual dependence, and when we act in alignment with that truth, we feel it. There's a coherence, a rightness that settles into the body when you've been genuinely kind, and a low grinding dissonance when you haven't. The practice is everywhere. It doesn't require grand gestures. Hold a door, ask someone how they're really doing, and then wait for the actual answer. Let someone merge in traffic without the internal monologue of injustice. Compliment something specific and true. Say thank you and mean it. These aren't small things dressed up as big ones. They are, quietly, some of the most significant choices you make all day. Because every interaction is a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. Cast yours thoughtfully. Cast them often. Just say yes. Here's a confession most people won't make out loud. The things they regret most aren't the chances they took. They're the ones they didn't. The invitation they declined because they were tired. The trip they almost booked. The conversation they talked themselves out of starting. The version of their life that existed just one yes away from the one they're currently living. Comfort is seductive. The Stoics knew this well and warned against it constantly, not because comfort is evil, but because an excessive attachment to it quietly shrinks your world. You stop taking risks. You stop showing up in new rooms. You start organizing your life around the avoidance of discomfort rather than the pursuit of meaning. And meaning, almost always, lives just outside the boundary of what feels safe. Seneca wrote, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what is truly worth fearing, and a life half-lived is near the top of that list." He understood that the real danger wasn't failure. It was the slow erosion of possibility that comes from defaulting to no. This doesn't mean saying yes to everything. The Stoics were also deeply intentional about where they directed their energy. The yes we're talking about here is the one your gut wants to say before your fear talks you out of it. The dinner with people you don't know yet. The class you've been curious about. The project that feels too big. The vulnerable conversation you've been postponing for months. Every yes you say to something new is a vote against stagnation. It's evidence that you trust yourself to handle what comes next, even if you don't know exactly what that is. And more often than not, the experience on the other side of that yes, however imperfect, however awkward, will give you something you didn't have before. A story, a connection, a skill, a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing. Your life is being written in real time. The plot depends entirely on the choices you make. Say yes more often and watch the story get more interesting. You might be surprised how much you've been missing by playing it safe. Put the phone down. The average person checks their phone over 90 times a day. 90. That's roughly once every 10 minutes during waking hours. And most of the time, there's no particular reason, just a reflex, a reach, a moment of boredom or discomfort converted instantly into scrolling. We've built a civilization of distraction and called it connection. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." And he wrote that in the 2nd century, before notifications. before algorithms engineered to capture and hold your attention, before you could spend 3 hours watching strangers react to videos of other strangers. He had no idea how relevant that line would become. Here's what happens when you put the phone down. The present comes back. Slowly at first, then with a kind of richness that feels almost foreign if you've been away from it for a while. You notice things, the quality of light in the room, the sound of the neighborhood settling in the evening, the thought you were about to have before the notification interrupted it. You remember that your mind, unprompted and unscrolled, is actually a remarkably interesting place to spend time. The Stoics practiced something called prosoche, present moment awareness, a continuous, gentle returning of attention to the here and now. It wasn't meditation in the way we typically picture it. It was a daily discipline of choosing presence over distraction, repeatedly, with the understanding that your attention is the most valuable thing you own. Whatever it rests on grows. Whatever it ignores fades. The practice here is not perfection. It's not throwing your phone into a lake and moving to the countryside. It's intentional space. An hour in the evening without the screen. A meal where the phone stays in another room. A walk where you let your thoughts wander without a podcast to fill the silence. The silence is not empty. It's full of everything you've been too distracted to notice. Your own wants, your own ideas, your own life happening right now, asking for a little of your undivided attention. Give it that. Even once a day, it will change more than you expect. You need a break. There's a particular kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. You know the one. You wake up after 8 hours and still feel like you've been carrying something heavy for too long. It's not physical exhaustion. It's the accumulated weight of routine, of sameness, of days that blur into each other without any horizon to walk toward. The Stoics weren't advocates for endless grinding. Seneca was explicit about this. Retire into yourself as much as possible. Rest wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. The mind that never rests eventually stops working well. Creativity dries up. Patience thins. The capacity for joy narrows to a point where even good things stop feeling good. Breaks restore something that productivity cannot manufacture. When you step away from your regular life, genuinely away, not just physically absent while mentally still at your desk, your brain enters a restorative mode that neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is where insight happens, where problems you've been forcing suddenly solve themselves, where your sense of who you are and what you actually want gets recalibrated. Travel, in particular, has a specific kind of power. It doesn't have to be expensive or exotic. A different town, a night somewhere you've never slept, a road taken without a destination fixed in advance. New environments force your brain off autopilot. You notice more, feel more, remember more. Time seems to expand. A week of travel feels longer and richer in memory than a month of identical routine. And here's the Stoic angle. The Stoics encouraged premeditatio, the deliberate contemplation of change and impermanence. Travel does this naturally. It reminds you that the world is larger than your usual orbit, that other people live differently, value differently, see differently, that your problems, while real, are not the center of the universe. So plan the trip, book the weekend, take the afternoon, not as an escape from your life, but as an investment in it. You'll come back to the same desk, the same room, the same responsibilities, but you'll come back as someone who's been reminded, however briefly, that life is larger than your current view of it. Go be with your people. The longest study on human happiness ever conducted, Harvard's nearly 90-year study of adult development, arrived at a conclusion so simple it almost sounds too obvious to be profound. The quality of your relationships is the single greatest predictor of how happy and healthy you will be across your entire life. Not wealth, not achievement, not status, relationships. Seneca knew this long before the data existed to prove it. Associate with those who will make a better man of you, he wrote. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. For the Stoics, relationships weren't social obligations or background comforts. They were the actual material of a meaningful life. The people you choose to spend time with are, in a very real sense, choosing who you become. And yet, modern life has constructed almost every condition necessary to make this harder. We're busier than ever, more connected digitally and more isolated in person. We cancel plans without guilt and call texting staying in touch. We drift from people we love not out of conflict, but out of simple inertia, the slow accumulation of unreturned calls and postponed dinners until the distance feels normal. The Stoics would call this a failure of intentionality. You don't drift toward virtue, they argued. You choose it. And you don't drift toward deep relationships either. You build them deliberately, repeatedly, by showing up even when you're tired, by making the call even when there's nothing specific to say, by choosing the kitchen table over the couch and the device. Research from social science consistently shows that people who maintain regular face-to-face contact with friends and family report lower rates of depression, faster recovery from illness, longer lives, and substantially higher daily mood. This isn't metaphor, it's physiology. We are wired for each other. So, think right now about someone you've been meaning to reach out to. Not tomorrow. Not when things settle down. Now, send the message, make the plan, show up in the life of someone who matters to you, and let them show up in yours. The research is clear. Your gut already knew it. There is almost nothing better for your happiness than the people who genuinely love you. Help someone today. Here's a paradox worth sitting with. One of the fastest routes to feeling better about your own life is to stop focusing on it entirely and turn your attention towards someone else's. The Stoics called this sympathia, the understanding that all human beings are connected, that we exist not as isolated individuals, but as nodes in a vast network of mutual responsibility. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea again and again throughout his journals. We were made for cooperation, he wrote, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. When you help someone, you're not doing them a favor from a position of surplus. You're fulfilling a basic function of what it means to be human. And the research on this is some of the most consistent in all of positive psychology. Acts of service, volunteering, helping a neighbor, mentoring someone younger, donating time or resources, produce measurable increases in well-being for the giver. It reduces anxiety. It creates what psychologists call a helper's high, a genuine neurochemical reward for pro-social behavior. The more regularly you help others, the more stable and purposeful your own life begins to feel. But beyond the science, there's something the Stoics understood that numbers can't fully capture. Helping others connects you to a narrative larger than yourself. When your own life feels small or stuck or overwhelmingly heavy, service is one of the few things that consistently shifts perspective. You realize your problems are real but not total. You discover resources in yourself you didn't know existed. You find, almost without looking for it, a reason to keep going. You don't need to volunteer every weekend or redesign your life around service. Start smaller. Help someone carry something. Offer your expertise to someone who needs it. Check in on the neighbor who's been quiet lately. Cook a meal for someone going through a hard time. The act doesn't have to be large. The shift it creates in you will be. Because when you move through the world as someone who helps, you stop being a passenger in your own life. You become someone whose presence matters, and that feeling that you matter, that you contribute, is one of the deepest satisfactions a human being can experience. Count what you have. Epictetus said it plainly. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. A line written 2,000 years ago that most people will spend their entire lives failing to actually practice. Because here's the honest truth about the human brain. It is not naturally wired for gratitude. It is wired for threat detection, for comparison, for noticing what's absent or wrong or insufficient. This kept our ancestors alive in environments where danger was constant. It is considerably less useful when you're lying awake at 2 a.m., mentally cataloging everything your life is missing. Gratitude is not a feeling that arrives on its own. It's a practice, a discipline, a deliberate retraining of the lens through which you see your days. The Stoics practiced a version of it called negative visualization, not as a pessimistic exercise, but as a way to fully appreciate what they already had. They would imagine losing something they valued, a relationship, their health, their freedom, not to dwell in fear, but to feel viscerally the weight of what they already possessed before it was gone. Try it now. Think about something in your life you take completely for granted. Someone you love. The fact that your body is mostly working. A home that keeps you warm. A skill